Kevin, teach us.
Okay, this is for Refuah Shlema, for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, and for the Kaplans, and for other people who require Refuah Shlema in Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay, so continuing still on the theme of cooking, the malacha of cooking, warming foods. Now this will have to do in more than one. Actually, we might be able to finish it. All types of cold food, solid or liquid, may be raised to a lukewarm temperature below 45 degrees C by placing them on top of a covered utensil, such as an urn. It is essential that such foods would not be able to reach 45 degrees C, even if they would be left there indefinitely. If the food is fully cooked, solid, it is permissible to let its temperature rise further, but it may still not be placed directly on the stove. This paragraph may provide a practical hint to one who wishes to serve warm food at a Shabbos lunch, which might lose its freshness if it is left on the stove for most of the Shabbos. An alternative method of warming a pre-cooked solid is to immerse it in hot water, in accordance with the principles described earlier. For example, cooked dry potatoes may be immersed in a pot of hot water which has been removed from the stove. Okay. Certain authorities permit the use of a timer for a cooker which has been programmed before Shabbos to turn on shortly before the morning meal to warm up the food. This is subject to the following conditions. A, the food has been fully cooked before Shabbos. B, it was placed on the cooking area prior to Shabbos. And C, the cooking area has been covered. And the last point, an electric hot plate may be used to hold food which is placed on it prior to Shabbos. If its setting cannot be adjusted and it is not hot enough for cooking, it does not need to be kept covered. Nevertheless, the other four conditions for returning food to a stove must be complied with. A vacuum flask, thermos, may be used and is classified as a kli sheni. So when you boil the water, you pour it into, it's called a flask, or I don't know what they call it anyway.
So we're on chapter 3 of Derech Hashem, discussing the topic of man by the Ramchal Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, translated by Rav Aryeh Kaplan with commentary. So, what we basically said is as follows, is that man was created with both a good urge and an evil urge. He has the power to incline himself in whichever direction he chooses. And the reason so is that he can earn his spiritual reward, because he doesn't have a proclivity towards either. And in order for him to earn his reward, it has to be a true achievement, not given to him. All right. So now we're going to discuss the concept of body and soul as opposites, the war between them and its purpose. In order that God's goal be best achieved, the highest wisdom decreed that man should consist of two opposites. These are his pure spiritual soul and his unenlightened physical body. Each one is drawn towards its nature, so that the body inclines towards the material, while the soul leans towards the spiritual. The two are then in constant battle. If the soul prevails, it not only elevates itself, but elevates the body as well. And the individual thereby attains his destined perfection. If he allows the physical to prevail, on the other hand, then besides lowering the body, he also debases his soul. Such an individual will be unfit for perfection and will be kept far from it, God forbid. Even so, he retains the ability to subjugate the physical to his soul and intellect, and thereby achieve perfection. Okay. God's goodness decreed that there be a limit to man's effort required to attain perfection. After this period of effort is completed, he attains his limit of perfection and is then allowed to enjoy it for all eternity. So God therefore created two distinct periods. One is a time for earning and the other is a time for receiving reward. As a general rule, however, that which pertains to good is always greater. The period of earning is therefore limited and lasts no longer than God's wisdom decreed suitable for his purpose. The period of reward, on the other hand, has no limit, and man continues to derive pleasure from his earned perfection for all eternity. So just 2 points I want to mention on this. Firstly, is that the one thing that I need to check if the Ramchal discusses is that there are parts of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, that don't deal with the body. It's not so simple that it just deals with the soul and the body. Because if you have a look, I've seen documentaries recently, and Arthur's had it ad nauseum where he's worked in terms of the mafia. Now, you've got a guy in his 70s that's about to croak in 10 years, and he's still looking at world conquering. And clearly he's got no indication that he's even got much time left on the earth and no conscience. So this sort of thing for power, for greed. Okay, lust is something of the body. Greed of food is of the body. But what about greed in terms of finances and power and money and various other activities, ego, jealousy? These are inflictions of the mind. They're not inflictions of the body. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, I want to ask you, what's the difference? So there's the view of Sumchus and the Tana of this Mishnah versus the rabbis, including Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda. What's their view difference?
Rabbi? Yaakov and Rabbi?
You've got Rav Yaakov, Rav Yehuda, the rabbis. Then you've got, on the other hand, Sumchus and the Tana of this Mishnah. What's the difference in their view?
Sorry, Damon, can you just repeat that to me again? Sorry, my son was here.
No problem. You've got Sumchus and the Tana of this Mishnah versus the rabbis, which include Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda. What's the two different views, and what do they hold?
And this is from yesterday, right? With
You could.
No.
Kevin, you go. I think I'll have
No, you go. You know,
Right, Kevin, have a bet.
You two before me.
I'll try off this as well, but you go for it first.
Go, Kev.
I think some of us goes with the traditional view that Tam is half damages, Muad is full damages paid with the choice property, whereas Rav Yehuda and Rav Meir, what's it?
Rav Yaakov
say if is and this is still on the theme of adequate guarding, not superior guarding. They continue this, Damon.
Yeah, so listen, that is correct. So all I was alluring to, that is absolutely a correct answer. To be more specific, when we're talking about who holds about that you're liable for tam and why.
Kevin, otherwise the other ones.
That you're liable for tam as in
for somebody that's mentally incompetent.
Sumchos.
It's up to you to tell to me and why.
Yeah. No, I'm just having a guess.
Okie dokie.
Actually, Sumchos. Yeah, Rav Yehuda says no. Okay, I'm having a guess.
Okay, it's the opposite. Sumchos and the Tana of this Mishnah disagree that damages can be collected for tam. According to them, the agent is only there to act as a custodian, to look after the animal, and to do muad court counting on behalf of the mentally incompetent owners. That's all. They're not empowered to pay off payment damages to the damaged party. Okay? Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda hold like the rabbis, where the court appoints an agent to allow the damaged party to collect their half payment tam damages. This is according to Rava. All right, let's get started. All right. So this means, guys, that we know that we have to do chazorah. All right. So let me just get started, and then we'll share.
You left out that whole section about the when it's muad for Yehuda and for the other one about when it's muad, that you take it first from the goof of the body, the tum portion, and the balance you pay from.
No, I said Kevin's correct. As far as that's.
Did Kevin say that?
Yes.
I said the sumchos part. I didn't say
No, but he did say that. He was talking about that. I said he's correct. All right, let's
go into the same amount of detail, but it's fine.
Yeah, listen. As long as you guys understand it, let's cover.
No, but you got it, Kevin, because you were awake yesterday and you did revision. You're very good. You were good today.
Me? No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
All right. So all right, guys. Let's just do a quick thing. So 39b2. Let's just do a quick summary on Rava's view. So Rav is talking about the case where Rav Yaakov speaks of a muad whose damage one normally pays for in full. So he was saying, well, what case are you dealing with here? If it's a normal muad, there's nothing to talk about. If you didn't look after it, you pay full damages. If somebody broke in your place and it's an unavoidable accident, you'd pay nothing for muad, even if the ox is guaranteed to be muad and it damages, because that's beyond your control. So he's saying, no, we're talking about something different. We're talking about this concept of a lesser guarding and a superior guarding. Lesser guarding means you guarded it, but not to the full potential of what you could have done. So, for example, it was discussed as like closing a door, which can handle a very ordinary wind, nothing special. And a superior guarding is when you've got proper thick door material, you're locking, you're bolting it. It could take a mixture of an animal trying to escape as well as a howling wind. So in other words, it's a much more protective measure, but it's not like completely neglecting the animal and allowing it to damage. For sure, then you pay full damages, no question. So it says Rav Yaakov in this case holds like Rav Yehuda, who said that with regards to a muad, you can perform a lesser guarding, okay? But with regards to tam, you have to perform a superior guarding. Why? Because of the reason that Gavin said logically. Well, the reason is because it's scripturally mentioned, but his logic behind it was totally sound. And that reason is that you would think that if an ox was a habitual gorer, you know to look after it super vigilantly. The Torah doesn't have to tell you the obvious. But with regard to an animal that's innocuous, that's tame, that hasn't had a bad history, we would have to be told that it needed a superior guarding. In other words, whatever you can do to make sure that the animal is safe. So that's why Rabbi Meir actually holds more Gavin holds more by Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir said whether it's tam or muad, you have to do a superior guarding. Because in Gavin's case, just like Rabbi Meir, it's obvious with regards to a muad because it's habitually encourageable. It's basically an aggressive animal with a long-standing history of this. So there it's obvious. So you pay for muad. The chidush is that you pay for tam. That's why the Chumash needed to mention it. So according to Rabbi Meir, you're obligated for both, which actually makes sense to both me and Gavin. I'm sure maybe to you guys. Rav Yehuda is saying, look, we're just working on scriptural verse, which means that it mentions you pay for tam, and you need a greater guarding for tam, superior guarding. So therefore, that's it. As far as muad, there's no scriptural mention, so you don't have to. The reason I think he maybe holds like that, it's just a guess, is that at the end of the day, we said, look, with muad, you're paying full payment damages anyway. You're paying a fortune. So therefore, you at least don't need to be as strict with regards to how you make a person pay. Whereas with tam, they're already getting the leniency of half payment damages from the body of the attacking animal. And if the attacking animal is puny, you're really not getting away with paying that much. You're getting away with it. So that makes sense. So in summary, that's Rabbi's view, that Rav Yaakov holds like Rav Yehuda. So what's this portion? So basically, the Gemara says you pay the tam, you pay half payment damages. And we said it can't be talking about tam. This is how this whole issue came up. Why? Because if you were talking about tam, you don't need to mention the obvious. There's obviously half payment damages, so we must be talking about something extra, and that is muad. So he's saying, listen, but for muad, if you don't look after it, it's full payment. Or if you were negligent, you don't pay anything. So therefore, we have to talk about a case in the 55th daf, 55b and 45b, which I showed you yesterday, which talks about this lesser guarding, which is known as a proper guarding, means you were negligent, and a superior guarding, which means you were very vigilant. And in a case where it's muad, where a lesser guarding would suffice, it doesn't mean you're off the hook completely, because you still have to pay the tam portion. Why? Because exactly as Kevin said, is that this is how it works, is that the tam portion you pay anyway from the body of the attacking animal. If your ox becomes muad, you pay the rest of the money, the balance, from choice property or cash. So if you're not paying for a lesser guarding with muad, you still have to pay the tam portion, which means that you pay your half payment damages from the attacking animal. But the muad portion you don't have to pay with a lesser guarding. And then Rav Yehuda rules that the court does appoint an agent to be able to collect tam damages on behalf of the mental incompetence to pay the damaged party. And Rav Yaakov agrees in that case. So that's very, very straightforward. Can we go on to today's topic?
Just one question.
Sure.
Why would, I know you've said it before, why would people guard a muad ox less than a tam ox? The muad ox is a proven track record of more than 3 gorings. It's...
Okay, so that's exactly the question that bothered all of us 2 days ago and yesterday. So the only thing I can think about that why Rav Yehuda would say it is, number one, there's a scriptural verse specifically relating to tam about a superior guarding. And we go according to scripture no matter what, even if logic doesn't support it. That's number one. Number two, we haven't gotten to the 45th or 55th daf, so it might bring the reason there very clearly in the Gemara. We haven't gotten there. I think it will bring a reason. The reason I guessed at is perhaps because you're paying full payment damages, you don't have to be as stringent for the muad portion, because you would still be paying the tam portion according to Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like you're off the hook completely. Whereas the other rabbis say, listen, it's full payment from choice property. Therefore, there is no tam amount. It's either you pay from the attacking animal from choice property, and therefore it's a case of paying everything or paying nothing. Then you can't be, lenient. That's why Rabbi Meir would say by logic you'd pay for everything. All right. So now we're saying, okay, that was Rava's opinion. Okay, now we're going to discuss Abaya's opinion, because he sees a conflict, not an agreement between Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda. Okay, so Abaya said to Rava, now just remember, Rava explains that Rav Yaakov has got 3 rulings to state that a deaf, muted, deranged person and a minor pay half damages for the damage inflicted by a muad. Okay, these are the 3 rules. Okay, factor 1, a muad requires a lesser guarding. Okay, so that's why you don't pay the muad section. B, the tam portion of the muad remains in place, and that you don't need a lesser guarding, but you need a superior guarding regarding the tam portion, and therefore with a lesser guarding you might not pay the muad portion in choice property or cash, but the tam portion doesn't fall away, because that in essence has to be paid before the muad, and the muad payment just completes it. And the tam portion requires a stringent guarding, which never happened here. So that is the second factor. The third factor, in the case of the tam, is that the court empowers the agent to facilitate collection from the animal's body. That's very important to know, okay? Because it's going to change a bit when we're dealing with the buyer. Right, now what's the buyer's opinion to Rava? But do they say In other words, Yaakov and Rav Yehuda. In other words, don't they disagree regarding a certain matter? We've learned in the Bryce, if the ox of a deaf, mute, a deranged person, or a minor god, Rav Yehuda rules him liable. He pays half damages. We see that Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda disagree regarding the Bryce's case. How then can Rava attribute Rav Yaakov's ruling to him having adopted Rav Yehuda's views? Okay? So, the Gemara actually deflects this challenge. It says, look, Rabbi Bar Ula said Rav Yehuda and Rav Yaakov are actually in perfect agreement. As for the Brisa just stated, this is the meaning. That which Rav Yehuda rendered liable, Rav Yaakov explained. Rav Yaakov was not disputing Rav Yehuda. He was explaining that when Rav Yehuda ruled that the owner is liable, he means for half damages. Thus, Rava's view is sustained. Okay, so basically, how do we know this? Generally, if there's a dispute, it's got this wording. It says, guys, so-and-so says, and then so-and-so says. Does that make sense? So the Bava Kamma says this, Sumchus says that. It has that sort of phraseology. That implies they're in for an argument. But in this case, it doesn't say that. The wording in the Brisa uses Rav Yehuda rules him liable. Rav Yaakov says he pays half damages, which means he's not arguing with him. He's just saying, listen, when Rav Yehuda says he's liable, Rav Yehuda says, yes, he's liable for half damages. It's an agreement. So it's saying that Rava's view is sustained. Now it's going to criticize Abaya's view, and it says, look, according to Abaya, who says that they disagree, in what case do they disagree? In the case of a tam or muad guarded with a lesser guarding, Rav Yehuda would not demand full damages. In the case of a muad left entirely unguarded, Rav Yaakov would require full damages. What is the case in which Rav Yehuda demands full damages and Rav Yaakov half damages? Okay, so there seems to be a slight disagreement according to Abaya. Guys, what disagreement according to what I've just said now? Can I repeat it in a simple way?
I think I can.
Be good.
Okay. So we're always saying is Rav Yehuda says that there's full payment, and Rav Yaakov is saying no, there's half payment. So Abai is saying, hang on a second, it's not quite as simple as they in agreement. They're not in agreement. They both agree that you have to pay. I'm not disputing that where the one says you pay and the one doesn't. But what we're saying is here is I'm saying that Abai is saying that Rav Yehuda is saying full payment and Rav Yaakov half. So they're disagreeing in terms of to what extent you pay. That's what I'm saying now. They're not arguing whether you pay or don't. It's not that simple. They both say pay. The one says pay full, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rav Yaakov says you pay half.
Just give us the specifics of that again. Just they pay half when and they pay full.
No, I'm going to go through it now. But at the moment, it was just grappling with that wording. What do you mean they agree or they disagree or saying no? Listen, they don't agree. They might not use the term so-and-so says you pay and so-and-so says you don't pay because they both agree you got to pay. But it doesn't mean they agree on the amount because Rav Yehuda is saying full payment and Rav Yaakov is saying half. So we're going to say, well, what's the story here? So Abaya will answer you with what case are we dealing with? With the case of a muad that the owner left entirely unguarded. And why does Rav Yaakov suffice with half damages? Okay, so now, guys, just remember we've left this case on partial looking after and partially not. Okay, because of Rav Yehuda's full damages, half are paid from choice property and half are taken from the muad's body. So he's saying, look, there's still full payment here. You were completely negligent. It wasn't a lesser. You didn't. It was. You basically didn't look after the animal at all. In other words, if you looked after the animal somewhat, what would Rav Yehuda say?
Half payment.
Correct, from the tum portion, but you don't have to pay them what? For a lesser guarding. But what happens if you never looked after the animal at all? What does Rav Yehuda say?
Full.
Full. Yes, the only thing it's saying is he's saying full doesn't mean all from choice property. The tum is as what it is from the animal, the mikufa of the attacking animal, and whatever you owe as a balance, you pay from choice property. That's straightforward. So that's why it says you pay full damages, because it was a complete irresponsibility.
Okay. So it's basically the level of responsibility that you had that makes determines whether you pay a full or half. If
Correct.
you're responsible, it's half. If you're irresponsible and you didn't do anything, you pay full.
Correct. And why does Rashi say that this is the case in this brisa? Well, very clearly, is because Rav Yehuda notes that the court empowers an agent to allow the damaged party to collect both the tum portion and the muad portion of the damages. That's why. So in a normal case, it's obvious. But what are we saying is, even when you're dealing with people that are mentally incapacitated, the court agent can still pay on their behalf for damage the ox caused. That's what Rashi is saying. In this particular case, it's obvious in a normal.
Rabbi and Rashi say that too.
Yeah. So that's fine. So why does Rav Yaakov say half payment damages? Well, because Rav Yaakov holds like Rav Yehuda regarding only one of the rulings, and he disagrees with him regarding one of the other rulings. He holds like Rav Yehuda regarding one ruling. What ruling is that? For Rav Yehuda holds that the tum portion of a muad ox remains in its place. Okay? And Rav Yaakov agrees. Okay? And he disagrees with him regarding one ruling. Rav Yehuda holds that in the case of a tum, the court appoints an agent to allow the damaged party to collect the half damage payment from the animal's body, whereas Rav Yaakov holds that the court does not appoint an agent to allow the tum damage to be paid from the animal's body, or any tum damage to the damaged parties. Okay, so in the case of muad, Rav Yaakov now limits the agent's authority to collect only the muad portion of the animal. That's why he collects the half payment damages from the muad section, not the tum section, as Rava said before. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm going to share my diagram now.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, look, this is Rava and this is Abaya. I'm just going to explain it quickly. So Rava is saying like this. Kev, you falling asleep?
No.
Yes.
My eyes are open. No, I'm just closing my eyes.
Are you okay?
No, I haven't fallen asleep, seriously.
I tell you how he knew, because you started snoring. That's how he knew.
No, I just saw Z's like a cartoon. Okay. All right.
No.
Listen, so this is it. Here's Rava on one side. Rava says, look, Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Yaakov agree. Both agree that the tum portion remains in its place, and that muad can have a lesser guarding, and that because of the lesser guarding, you're only responsible for the tum portion, because the muad portion you don't have to pay for, and that the court appoints the agent to be able to collect on behalf of the damaged parties from mental incompetence. Okay? That's Rava's view. Abaya is saying it's not like that. What it's saying is that they only agree that you have to pay, but they're not in agreement in terms of how much you have to pay, because Rav Yehuda says that in this particular case, we're talking about a case where there wasn't any looking after at all. So a lesser guarding doesn't help. The animal wasn't even guarded. So therefore, it's straight muad. But Rav Yehuda, as we know, says that the tum section stays in its place, and the minute the ox becomes muad, you pay the balance from choice property, the remaining balance. So very clear. So that's Rav Yehuda. Rav Yaakov, he's saying, doesn't agree with Rav Yehuda in a certain regard. He does agree that the tum portion remains in his place. Okay, that's fine. The same as Rav Yehuda. And he's saying that in this particular case, he doesn't agree that he doesn't agree that the court has allowed the agent to have the power to collect for time damages from mental incompetence. Okay? Therefore, you only pay the muad section, but you can't collect the tam section.
Yeah.
So according to a buyer, Rav Yehuda says the court has allocated power to the agent, and according to according to a buyer, Rav Yehuda states the court has appointed the agent with that power, and Rav Yaakov said he has not. According to Rava, both Rav Yehuda as well as Rav Yaakov agree that the court has empowered the collection for time damages from mental incompetence.
So can I ask you a quick question? So how does Rabbi Yehuda then do the count if they're not assigning an agent?
Okay, no, they are assigning an agent. What I'm saying is the all agree that the agent has the capacity to count for muad.
There's no payment. But I thought
you just don't pay for the time section.
No, okay, I thought an agent. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
Sorry.
I thought that that he didn't agree with an agent at all. That's what I thought.
No, they all agree with an agent.
Okay, so it's just the application. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, got it.
Okay, so I'm going to share my chart since I put so much effort in it. Although I explained it reasonably that we don't need to at this point share the chart, but I'm just going to share it anyway.
Good effort in. We're going to look at it.
you will look at it because of the effort. Yeah. So Abai explains Rav Yaakov's view and Rav Yehuda. Where they're in agreement, they both hold that the tam portion of the muad remains in its place. You get that? That's according to Abaya's view. Where's the disagreement? Is that Abaya says, Rav Yehuda says the agent of the court allows the agent of the court to collect damages for tam. Rav Yaakov said the agent of the court cannot collect tam damage. That's their disagreement. And as such, you only can collect the muad portion and not the full portion. That's according to Rav Yaakov. And Rav Yehuda says you collect all of it. They're both talking about a case where an animal was not looked after at all. Okay. All right. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
All right. Let me just continue the Gemara. Okay, just hang on a second. Okay. It's just so we said he does not pay the half damages incurred by the tam portion of the animal. He only pays for the muad section according to Rav Yaakov. So according to Abaya, when Rav Yaakov rules that the owner must pay half damages, he refers not to the half damage payment of tam, but to the half damage payment of muad. Rava interprets Rav Yaakov's brisa as discussing a muad. The Gemara now questions his interpretation. Why did Rava interpret Rav Yaakov's brisa as discussing a muad? Because we said, why would he mention the tam? Because when you talk about half payment damages, it would seem obvious that everybody pays for half payment damages for a tam. So it had to be more than that. Otherwise, why mention the obvious? So Rav Acha bar Abaya, this is a different Abaya, guys. It's Rav Acha bar Abaya, said to Ravina, according to Abaya, who said that Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda disagree, all is well. Because Rav Yaakov's brisa discussing in muad is good. So according to Rav Acha bar Abaya, when he said to Ravina, I understand Abba's opinion more than Rava's opinion. For according to Abaya, Rav Yaakov holds that we don't appoint an agent in the case of a tam, as we see in the Brisa's dispute with Rav Yehuda. Perforce his half damage ruling pertains to a muad. But according to Rava, who said that Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda do not disagree, Rav Yaakov is of the opinion that we do appoint an agent in the case of a tam. Accordingly, Rava's interpretation of Rav Yaakov's brisa is difficult to understand. For instead of establishing the brisa speaking of a muad, let us establish it of speaking of a tam. Okay? So according to Rav Yehuda, who mandates superior guarding for a tam, we will interpret it as speaking in a case where he performs a lesser guarding of the ox, and he did not perform a superior guarding upon it. So it says, look, even according to Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, okay, this is a different Yaakov, who holds that a lesser guarding suffices for a tam, we can interpret it as speaking of a case where he did not look after the ox at all. Either way is liable to the half damage of a tam. So what are we saying here, guys, very simply, is that we're saying, look, there's two opinions. There's obviously Rav Meir and both Rav Yehuda saying for a lesser guarding, you're obligated for the tam portion, okay? And when you say that there's a case for a lesser guarding, you're not obligated for the tam portion. Let's just it's taking the Gemara Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's saying let's just go on that particular side where you can you don't have to have a proper guarding for a tam. All right. So again, Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Meir saying that you have to have a superior guarding, not a lesser guarding for a tam. Rav Eliezer bar Yaakov says a lesser guarding for a tam suffices. Okay? So whether you say that the animal wasn't guarded at all, because that's the only explanation you've got with Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, or you go according to Rav Yehuda or Rabbi Meir, that says basically, it was a lesser guarding, and you owe them point for tam. At the end of the day, what are you going to rule? What are you going to learn from here? I mean, what's such a novelty? Because either way, you're liable for the half damages. So the Gemara interprets to give the source that Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov allows a tam to be guarded with a lesser guarding. For it has been established in a brisa that Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov says both a tam and a muad, if their oxen's guarded them with a lesser guarding and the oxen nonetheless cause damage, the owners are exempt. We see that according to Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, a tam requires nothing more than a lesser guarding. Guys, let me take a very complicated thing and make it simple. All it's saying here is, let's assume that you are liable for the tam damage. If you're holding, according to Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, a lesser guarding would suffice, and therefore, according to Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, just hang on, Kevin, the animal was not looked after at all. According to Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, a lesser guarding does not suffice. You've got to bolt the door and have it superior guarding for tam. Therefore, you owe for tam. But no matter whose opinion you're going for in the Gemara, Kevin, it doesn't matter whose opinion. They all say that in this case, you owe for the tam. Okay? And that's where the half payment damages come from. Okay? And it says, so then why teach it? Because what's the novelty? We said Rava brings it up because if you're saying half payment damages, so what's the novelty? So it's saying, this is what Rav Yaakov would be informing us of, that in the case of a tam, we appoint an agent to follow the damaged party to collect the half payment damage from the animal's body. In other words, the novelty of the ruling would not be the amount of payment, but the fact that the court empowers the agent to facilitate its collection. Okay, so all we are saying here is that at the end of the day, is that in itself is a novelty. What's the novelty? That if the agent was negligent, that the owners that were mentally deranged or incompetent, etc., would have to pay the price. That's the novelty. You don't have to say that we can't be speaking about tam, there's no novelty, and therefore we can go to a muad explanation and everything else like that. We say the novelty in itself is, why isn't the agent paying? That's the novelty. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just let me just finish. Kevin, I've got 5 minutes left, hey?
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
All right. So Ravina answers, he said to Rav Acha bar Abaya, this is what Rava wishes to say. He wished to explain Rav Yaakov as teaching one ruling that has two underlying reasons. The ruling is that a muad owned by a deaf, mute, deranged person or a minor pays half damages. The two underlying reasons are one, that a muad requires only a lesser guarding and its tam portion remains in its place, and two, that we appoint an agent in the case of a tam. Having defended Rava's approach, the Gemara now returns to Abaya's original challenge to Rava, in which Abaya demonstrated from a brisa that Rav Yaakov and Rav Yehuda disagree. The challenge was first dealt with by Rabba bar Ula. And then next time we're going to discuss another challenge to this. We've already hit the 40th daf.
Wow.
And we're doing well, guys. We've got a minute. We can cover a little bit more ground. Just give me 1 second. So what's this discussion that Ravina said? It's an issue about jurisdiction on the ox's legal status, where basically if the deaf mute gained speech and hearing, deranged person became insane, or the minor became an adult, or the car came back from overseas, Rav Yehuda holds that despite the change in jurisdiction, the ox remains in its present muad state. Rav Yaakov said that coming under new jurisdiction, it alters the animal's status to go back to a tam state. And therefore, that's why you only owe half payment damages. All right, guys, we're done.
Just repeat that last. Just repeat that last part.
The Rav Ula saying that the argument actually has to do with jurisdiction. That according to Rav Yehuda, it's full payment damages because it remains muad, and Rav Yaakov said that when it changed jurisdiction, it goes back to tam. It's half payment damages.
The word status than jurisdiction. The word status sounds more appropriate than jurisdiction.
No. It changes location. It goes from the agent's home.
Location. Okay.
Yes, to the contact person's home, because they've come right in the head. So it then can go back home.
Yes. There's